Good evening, everyone. I see a couple new faces. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Joshua Kiak. I'm the manager of the Synagogue Leadership Initiative at the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to join us for this panel. During the month, I'm first going to share a little bit about what Federation is doing, and then we're going to go into the program. During March, we're going to be running our March Mega Food Drive. The pandemic has significantly increased food insecurities in our community, and our goal is to collect 8,000 pounds of food and distribute over 3,000 snack packs over the month of March. And the communities in Texas are still reeling from the impact of not only COVID, but also the winter storm. Freezing temperatures and lack of power have wreaked havoc across the state, and we've set up a page for donations that will be going directly to the communities impacted by the storm. And then upcoming on March 7th, we have Super Sunday. So for more information on these events, please visit our website at jfnnj.org and keep an eye out in your email for more SLI programs coming up. I want to thank the panel participants for opening up and sharing, and being willing to share their experiences with these different kinds of collaborations. We have a range of collaborations from mergers to sharing space and sharing collaboration on a religious school. So we're going to start with one of the mergers. We're starting with Joel Rubin, who is at Kol Dorot. And Joel, I'm going to give the floor over to you, and please introduce yourself and share your experiences.
Great, thanks, Josh. Good evening. Nice to meet all of you and see all of you, albeit remotely. My name is Joel Rubin. I'm the immediate past president of Kol Dorot. Kol Dorot is the merger child of Temple Beth El in Closter and Temple Beth Or in Washington Township. Two Reform congregations, each of whom was around for probably 60, 65 years. And over the last, officially in July of 2019, but over the last couple of years came together to form what we believe is a new congregation. With bringing the two of our congregations together. I won't go through the whole long sordid story of what got us here, but just a few kind of top level details that I think are important. Like probably most mergers or mergers that are being contemplated or alternate arrangements that are being contemplated, this was driven 100% by finances. Financially, we were two failing congregations. We had dwindling membership. The membership that we had was aging. We were having trouble attracting students into our religious school. And it's a cycle that kind of feeds itself, and certainly in Reform Judaism is not an unusual story these days, unfortunately. And so at Temple Beth El, which is where I belonged, and I was president of Temple Beth El at the time, we made the decision to seek some type of alternative arrangement. And we didn't define it up front as a merger. We considered a merger, we considered a partnership, we considered shared campus, cohabitation. Really, we were kind of open and had very few predisposed notions of where we wanted to end up. What we knew is that in our current state, we were destined to basically be bankrupt in about 12 to 18 months. So we knew we had to act quickly, and we did that. An important part of the process for us, because when we all sit around in the boardroom, and I assume everyone either is or has been part of your congregational board, we all like to think that we know kind of everything. certainly I fall prey to that. And when you put all of us together, we all really think we know everything based on our past experiences and whatnot. And the first thing we did, which was a critical decision and one that kind of flew in the face of fiscal responsibility, is we hired a consultant, which wasn't really our style, but what we realized that we were doing was fighting to save our congregation in some way, shape, or form. And we needed somebody with clear eyes and an objective viewpoint in terms of where we had been, where we were right then, and where we were going. So we brought in Rabbi David Wolfman, who's based up in Boston. And he came in, flew down to New Jersey a couple of times, met with the board of Temple Beth El. We had a tremendous rapport with him. And he really laid it out for us and explained, where Judaism, where he felt Reform Judaism was, where it was going, and what some of our options would be. In addition to those conversations about kind of organizational structure, he focused quite a bit on organizational change. Because it's one thing for board members to sit around in a room and decide we should merge, we should sell our building, we should merge with another school or something like that. But it's another thing to sell it to the congregation, to a group of people who are deeply connected to the building, the congregation, the clergy, their friends, and it helped us very clearly realize that this wasn't just a business decision. The business part of it was driving the conversation, but that this was very much an emotional decision too, and that we needed to handle that appropriately in order to manage it well. So we went out looking for a partner. Again, we didn't really have a preconceived notion of what that might look like. We met with a couple of people. We met with clergy from a couple of people, lay leadership from a couple of different congregations. And, it was kind of like speed dating. It either felt right or it didn't feel right. And we kind of, we both came into these meetings with clear eyes, understanding, hey, this might be something, it might not be something. And if it's not something, it's okay. We can shake hands and walk away friends, back when we could shake hands. And so I don't know if we stumbled across, but we found Temple Beth Or in Washington Township, who was going through exactly the same structure. It was the same story 9 miles west. And so through a series of conversations, what we realized, and meetings with the clergy, and I mean, this was a very collaborative effort, was that we were peas in a pod. Our congregations were living kind of parallel lives, not just in terms of our financial trajectory, but also the type of people that were part of our congregation, the spirit, the energy, we were their people and they were our type of people. So we continued to meet and, let the relationship kind of deepen a bit amongst the lay leadership and the clergy. It did deepen, and we decided to push forward with the merger. It was a bit complicated. We had a building, a very old building that we needed to sell. They had a very old building that they needed to sell for financial reasons. So I'll leave the real estate piece out of it. I'll just short circuit it by telling you, we sold our building, they sold their building. We took the combined proceeds. We bought a new building, an office building in Oradell, right smack in the middle of our two areas, of our two towns. We now are just finishing renovations on it and hope to open as soon as COVID lets us open up. So that's kind of how we got there. The keys for me as we went through this entire process was complete and full transparency with our partner. Because they weren't, at that point, they weren't our partner, they were us and we were them. So we had Temple Bethel over here, which continued to function while we were sort of sorting out what a merger would look like. We had Temple Bethel over here doing the same thing. And we created what we called an integration team, which was effectively a joint board, which met every 2 weeks for a year. It was brutal. I mean, it was, from a time standpoint, but we went through every single thing, or at least every single thing that we could think of that we needed to concern ourselves with in bringing this merger together. Things from the biggest issues, like what does our clergy look like? We had 2 rabbis, 2 cantors, 2 educators, etc. So what does that look like, and our staff look like, down to whose Judaica would hang in the walls, on the walls in the new building, and what our procedure and traditions would be, because obviously traditions grow up in congregations, and everyone's got their own set of things that they do that nobody else does, or that not many people other people do. And so we went through literally a list. Every meeting we'd have a list of 2, 5, 10 things, and try to just check them off, make decisions, document it, so that we knew what our new congregation would look like. In the meantime, we had to do things like pick a name. We were creating a new congregation, and we didn't want it to be Temple Bethel, because Temple Bethel would feel kind of on the outside, and vice versa. So we decided, one of the decisions we made is to create an entirely new name for our congregation. So that was an entire process of picking that. A logo, what does that look like? And so on and so forth. So this was the process we went through for about a year.
Bill, with
Yep.
2 minutes.
Okay, thanks. So, at the end of the day, I would say that we probably tackled 70 or 80% of what we tackled 100% of what we thought we needed to tackle. We tackled about 70% of what we probably needed to tackle. But in that time, and once our congregations came together, the rest just kind of sorted itself out. And it sorted itself out through strong lay leadership, full and complete buy-in from the clergy, full and complete buy-in from the congregation, which was really, in my opinion, the key to the whole thing. And the process that we went through of integrating the congregations together, things from joint worship before we merged, to social events and mixers and things like that, all played into the fact that we kind of felt like we hit the ground running when we pulled it, when we actually flipped the switch and said, we are one congregation. So fast forward to today, we are one congregation. And then COVID hit. So I think the jury's still out on exactly what this looks like, because we've never actually all been in the same building together, because of the timing. But I think we're on the path to a very, very good success story based on all the work that we did.
Thank you very much. I know that it's hard to give everyone enough time. There's a lot of experience there, but we're going to move on to Evan, and Evan is at Temple Israel, and he's going to share about sharing space.
Hey, and thanks so much, Josh, for the invitation to come speak. So I'm Evan Weitz. I'm currently on the board of directors, a trustee. I was formerly treasurer as well as second vice president. And I'm going to talk today about kind of a hybrid model, something we did a little differently than a merger. So just by way of background, Temple Israel is an egalitarian conservative temple in Ridgewood. RCBI, which stands for Reconstructionist Congregation Beth Israel, was formerly in Maywood. They had been there for 60, 70 years. They had originally been conservative, and then had somewhere, I think, in the 90s become a Reconstructionist shul. But they came to the point that they couldn't sustain their building anymore in Maywood. And actually, ironically, it was at an SLI event, I'm told, about 6 years ago, when the two temples met each other. Originally, RCBI was looking essentially for really just a rental space. They really were just looking for space to kind of hold their services. we really wanted a merger. And so from the discussions, we kind of wound up somewhere in between. So what we eventually settled on was what I call the hybrid model. And I think, to understanding it, you have to start with the notion that the synagogue itself is not the physical building. The synagogue is something much bigger than that, and is a community. And that what we really view ourselves as is two synagogues under one roof. So within that, RCBI maintains a separate identity within the Temple Israel community. They have a separate rabbi. They have a separate membership, separate membership role. They do run their separate services in space in our building. We have a classroom that we've given to them for their services that connects to another classroom. And we allow them, that's where they store their ark, and that's where they do their services. However, we share a common community. So things like the Hebrew school, their kids go to our Hebrew school. Religious events are done together. Social events, adult education are all done jointly as one community. Their members are treated and are afforded all the rights of any Temple Israel member would be. On the business side, we share, accounting staff, and we provide office services to them, secretarial services, and also obviously our custodians look after them as well. So, we really do, except for the actual sort of religious piece, we do look at them as sort of, other congregants within our larger community. I will say that it took really about a year before that really kind of felt right. After they moved in, we would sort of combine for kiddishes, and, it'd be sort of like a really awkward, middle school dance, one temple's on the one side, the other temple's on the other side. And after about a year, I think we started commingling a lot more, to the point that when you go to the, go to our, barbecues, or, all the sorts of stuff that we do outside of the actual synagogue, or outside of the actual, prayer piece, you really couldn't tell who's an RCBI member and who's a Temple Israel member. Couple of advantages about this model I can talk to you about, and then I'll give you some of the challenges that I think you'd face if you want to do something like this from our experiences. So obviously, given what Joel just spoke about, this was a lot easier and a lot less messier than a merger. You didn't have to deal with people losing their identities. You didn't have to deal with combining liturgical staff. You didn't have to deal with kind of one temple kind of folding into another. And I think that makes it a lot easier for the congregation as a whole to accept on both sides. So it definitely is much easier, much less messier, much simpler than a merger. So that was definitely an advantage. Another advantage, economy of scale. For us, to provide, secretarial support, office support, custodian support, even security, the security we have for our high holidays, it's a de minimis cost for us, but clearly if they were to do that on their own, it'd be prohibitively expensive. So we liked it because obviously it gives us more money into our bottom line that we can use to offset these communal costs. But again, really for I think the smaller synagogue, they never would be able access to services like that if they had remained on their own. Increase the size of our overall community. As Joel had mentioned, I think everyone knows, it's tough being a Jew in Bergen County sometimes. There's just less of us. Anytime you can get more of us together, I think it's really for the overall community's benefit. And we've seen that. It's there's nothing nicer than showing up to a barbecue or a social function and the room is filled. And that's been a real plus for us. And I think also helps us in recruiting new members when they show up and they see a vibrant community as opposed to one that just has less bodies, less people there. I will say as a side note, one of the things that we found was, the type of folks that stayed with RCBI when they left their physical structure and joined us, they tend to be the most sort of diehard Jews. They're the folks who, these were not the 3-day Jews that showed up for our services, a couple of days out of the year. These are the folks who were seriously active. So we got folks who really contributed to our larger community, pound for pound, more than probably, we would have had any other larger group of congregants. So that was really helpful. I could tell you our current men's club president right now is RCBI member. A person who ran our publication for a while was an RCBI member. So they've definitely given back to the larger community, probably in greater and disproportionate amount compared to their overall population within the larger community. I think one thing that worked really well for them is, as part of the deal, their rabbi became the associate rabbi of overall Temple Israel. I think this helped them quite a bit because they've been attracting younger rabbis, mostly out of, right out of school, and being able to come to, again, a larger synagogue and have that title, I think has been really helped them entice clergy to come and work with them. It also, I think, worked out really well in the sense that for some of those younger rabbis, they got to be mentored by our rabbi, he's just more senior, he's just been around a lot longer. And I think that's really, really helped out RCBI, in terms of their clergy. Obviously, RCBI gets a nice, building, someplace that they can call home as opposed to just sort of rental space. Definitely challenging. Definitely the advantages flowed the other way too. Gave us some relief for our rabbi. So, for instance, the RCBI rabbi teaches at the Hebrew school, which frees up our rabbi's time. The RCBI rabbi does adult education classes, which again was great because we can offer more services without taxing our rabbi more. While they do keep their own services, we have found ways to combine them at times. So, for instance, with Purim coming up, what we're going to do this year is we're going to have a combined service, but then we're going to have a breakout where our traditional conservative rabbi is going to do the traditional Megillah, whereas the RCBI rabbi is going to do a family version for those who want to go do that instead of sit through the traditional Megillah. And that's, I think, been an example of sort of the ways that we've tried to integrate the two rabbis together, and it's, I think, worked really well for both. And again, I think the advantages here have flowed in both directions. In terms of challenges, there definitely are a few. Again, a lot easier than a merger. But I can tell you one thing with space. We for a while had a girls' Orthodox high school that was using our space. And what was great about that arrangement was that they needed space exactly when we didn't. And I think you see that with a lot of rental arrangements with temples, right? They don't need it during the high holidays because they're at their own temple. They need it, Monday through Friday, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. when the temple's almost empty anyway. RCBI posed the challenge because they need space at the exact same time we need space. Shabbos, high holidays, that's when they need the space. So as I mentioned, we had to carve out 2 classrooms that connect, and we had to dedicate that space to them. We let them, they posted up some of the memorial plaques with curtains over them so that when we use it as a classroom, you don't necessarily have the memorial plaques there. We put their ark in those classrooms, and then we paid to have that alarmed as well. So that was certainly challenging, having to make most changes. But I think it was critical to the arrangement that we had. But again, you're going to have to, I think, account for that if you look to do something along these lines. While our rabbis get along, certainly dealing with differing traditions and differing interpretations is going to be challenging. For us, I could tell you intermarriage. We had to come to grips with the fact that if RCBI wants to do a marriage, of a Jew and a non-Jew on our space, we have to allow that, even though some temple members didn't like that. But that was something that we had to sort of come to terms with, and it comes back to I think the larger idea that the synagogue itself is not just the physical building, and that's how we got comfortable with that. On the other hand, we have a kitchen. Our rabbi is the ultimate arbiter on what passes for kosher in that kitchen, and RCBI agreed that they would respect our rabbi's opinions on what they could do food-wise in that space. And so again, it was about really finding middle ground, but again, that's challenging. And then, of course, finally, because you have 2 separate synagogues, you have 2 separate rabbis, and for most temples, clergy is amongst the most expensive, expense or the highest expense that you have. So clearly, you don't realize a gain by being able to rely on one rabbi and a cantor. You have 2 rabbis there, which is going to be more money. But again, it's a challenge you just got to navigate.
I just want to give a 2-minute warning.
Sure. So I'll finish up then, in the last minute or so. But I will just say, in terms of lessons, if you're going to do this, first, your clergy really has to be into it. They can't give it lip service. They really got to, believe and really want to do this, because it's going to require, I think, the clergy to really make compromises amongst themselves and also deal with the fact that, they're not the only rabbi in the building anymore. So your clergy has to be really on board with it. I'll give you a great example. Like, we try to do our Kiddushes together, so we have to try to so that we have to line it up so that the services on Friday night end around the same time, or on Saturday have to end around the same time. And so you got to have rabbis on board that want to do that. Again, you just got to be flexible. You're going to have to make some compromises. You're in a way letting other folks into your house. And you've got to get comfortable with that. If you do, like I said, I think the advantages flow both ways and in both directions. But certainly there are some challenges. But all in all, I think in the right circumstances, it could be a game changer for 2 synagogues in the same area.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move right on to Jay, who is going to be talking about a school merger or school collaboration between two of our local schools.
Good evening, everybody. How are we doing? My name is Jay Murray. I'm with the Fair Lawn Jewish Center. I've been there for over 10 years now. I am not a past president. I'm not the treasurer, but I have been on the school board for, let's see, this is year number 4. I'm currently the only member of the board who actually has a student in the school, which gives me a little bit of a unique perspective on all that was going on. Like everybody else on this Zoom, I'm on other committees, other projects. And by the way, we all have other full-time jobs. Notice I said other than what we do here. I'm an accounting finance professional, not an educator. With that, so believe it or not, we went from 0 to a complete merger of the Fair Lawn Jewish Center Hebrew School and the Hebrew School of the JCC of Paramus in one summer. I think we were able to meet 3 times before COVID hit, and the worldwide pandemic didn't really help the situation in terms of getting everything set up. But Zoom was wonderful. We made it through. It's really been a fabulous collaboration, actually. From the Fair Lawn side, I can say that the people that we've been able to work with in Paramus have been wonderful. From the staff to the lay leaders, everybody. And really, when you're looking to do this sort of thing, that's what you're looking for. And I know Joel had mentioned the same thing. You have to find that fit. For us, it just clicked. And how did we get here? Right. So in all of our towns, we know demographics are shifting, competition is growing, Chabad offers free school. There's a shift in a lot of the younger couples that are looking more for the holiday learning and fun. Let's learn a little bit about Israel, but not really about the traditional education that a conservative shul is really going to offer. What we have been trying to do is grow our efforts to collaborate with neighboring synagogues and enhance our youth activities as well as our adult education. So one day, our president at the time, Steve Schwimmer, was having lunch with the president of Paramus, Wayne, and subject of the school came up. And luckily, you know, as none of you or I are, nobody is shy when it comes to talking about it. And the subject of possibly doing something together came up. It was a great idea. And the Board of Education from Fair Lawn and the Board of Education from Paramus were both fully on board. And why, right? What are we going to get with it other than some of the obvious things? Well, first of all, Fair Lawn had been operating at the time for 2 years with a volunteer principal rather. Our prior principal had left, and until we could find the right person to come in, we had someone step in, and we thank him greatly for that. So we were able to get a principal. We got Marcia Kajdan, who has many years of experience in Jewish education and was an amazing fit for us. And Paramus absolutely wanted her to stay on board as well. Between our 2 sets of staff, we were able to handpick who we wanted to stay, who were the best educators, and who were the ones who were always going to put the Jewish education of our kids first. We got curriculum improvements, we got a bigger school, we got better classes, more special programming, more field trips are going to be available when COVID is over, more Jewish friends for our kids, more parent volunteers. And as we all know, that is something that also dwindles over the years as we're going through everything. But with parents from both centers, it's really been great. Some of the challenges that we faced, other than doing this during a pandemic, what were the philosophies of each shul? Because at the school level, those still have to match. What were the philosophies of each school? We quickly discovered both shuls had a very similar philosophy in terms of the overall treatment of its members, as well as how they treated the school and what education they wanted to provide the kids. And given that, we've all been doing this for a while, would anybody's egos get in the way? And I'm happy to report that didn't happen either. So we got lucky there as well. Then you have to get into the nitty gritty, as Joel was saying. You have to drill down. You have to ask, how are we going to share expenses? What teachers are we going to use? What's the curriculum going to be like? How do we merge the two together to get the best of both worlds? Then came the hardest part of all. Joel talked about the members. Same thing. It's the parents. How do you get the parents to buy in? It's location, location, location. Will they be willing to go to Paramus if you live in Fairlawn, or to Fairlawn if you live in Paramus? And we really had to sell it to them to convince them that by getting Marcia, by getting the staff, by getting the curriculum, it really was going to be the best education and the best environment for their kids. And then you also have to convince the staff. You know, it's confusing for them to have to go between locations as well. But with Marcia's help, obviously they would be able to do that. We haven't had to test the theory yet because we're all doing Zoom fully twice a week on Tuesdays and Sundays now. You also have to deal with holidays. How are you going to handle that? How are you going to handle bar and bat mitzvah lessons? How will davening be handled? And luckily, Rabbi Wiener from Paramus and Rabbi Salston in Fairlawn spent a considerable amount of time going through everything and work.
Other people seem frozen.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Let's just give him a minute to clear up.
We'll get to it later. I actually do think that COVID has helped us with something.
Jay,
yeah,
you froze for a second.
Oh, I'm so
last thing I
sorry.
think we heard was you were saying Rabbi Wiener and Rabbi Saltzman.
Sorry about that. Rabbi Wiener and Rabbi Salston have met several times to go over holidays, bar and bat mitzvahs, davening, and how all of that will be handled. And they were able to work out, again, the best from both congregations and what fits with both congregations. And we agreed that bar and bat mitzvah lessons will still solely be handled by each synagogue, as it should be, to follow their traditions. We've checked all the boxes there with the parents. We've figured out how to sell it to them. We were able to meet with the board, explain to them all the benefits, both from a monetary standpoint and from an educational standpoint. And I'm happy to say that the decision was unanimous in both centers in order to create this new school. The parents came after them. We already talked about that. They were on board, a little hesitant, but on board. And then came the name. We had to pick a name. And we went with Community Hebrew School of Bergen County. And the reason you'll see that Paramus and Fairlawn are not in the names is we wanted to create a new organization that both centers could be equal parts in, and that we could welcome students from anywhere in Bergen County, no matter who they're affiliated with, come get the good education that you deserve. And Paramus actually led the way on this because they already had students from multiple towns. So by following that model, it really wasn't as hard as we thought it was going to be. And to what I said before, as far as COVID, COVID, I think, helped in terms of getting the school off the ground. And what I mean is it took the big stress point from all the parents off the table. By doing everything over Zoom, the parents and the students are focused solely on the education and the environment that their kids are in. And what happens is next year they can worry about the travel, but they'll know that the education, the programming is exactly what they're looking for. We've had several meetings with our parents, and having a student in the classroom, I've also talked to several students, and everybody's very happy with the end result that we've gotten. To that end, as to how we got to where we are again, what I want to do is just point out something, just to give you an idea of the people on the Board of Education that we have. Our regularly scheduled meeting was supposed to be tonight, and it's been moved so that I could do this. But instead of the other members of the board taking the night off, every one of them has come to be on this Zoom so that they could support and just be there for us the way that they've always been. And I want to thank all of them for that and for making this as easy as it's been. Most of what I do for my day job is mergers and acquisitions. I've been through a lot of them. And I can honestly say that almost none of them have been as easy as this one.
Okay, I
And
just want to say
great.
2 minutes.
I don't even need it. I'll wrap up in about 12 seconds. The only other thing I will say is I have a fifth grader in the school. It's a large class. It's handled really well. And like every other student, he complains about having to go to school after being in school. But to hear him walk around the house and singing the tunes and discussing what he's learned, and I can see him reading Hebrew and I can see him understanding the holidays, I know that it's paid off. And it's been a lot of work by a lot of people, but it's gone really well. And thank you to all of them.
Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least is Beverly. And she's going to be talking about another merger example.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Beverly Berkowitz. I am the former president of Congregation Beth Shalom that was located in Pompton Lakes. And about a year and a half ago, we merged with Pine Brook Jewish Center in Montville. Prior to that, we went through many different phases to try and to maintain our building. We once had a high of 250 members. We were a very active congregation. We were probably one of the only ones in Passaic County for a long time. And then slowly over time, for many of the reasons that you've heard earlier this evening, our membership started to decline. Children, when they were bar and bat mitzvah, families left us, and the population was aging, and we were not getting the next generation in. And so we started looking around on what we could do, because we saw the writing on the wall. So the first thing we did was, there was a congregation in Kinnelon, a Reformed congregation that had always met at a church. They were looking to move to a synagogue. They felt that if they had been in a synagogue, their membership would grow, that many of their members were not happy with meeting in a church. So we met with them. They were Reformed, we were conservative. And over several meetings, we decided that we could co-locate. They had a rabbi that worked very well with our rabbi. They understood certain things, kashrut laws in the building being very important. We talked about services, respecting each other's. We would try to do some things together. And it worked for a short time. They ended up joining us. And part of the deal was that they had hoped to buy in and become equal members of the building, that we would share all the costs. Unfortunately, after a very short period of time, they were running out of money. And for the last 2 years that they were with us, they were unable to pay. And that was when we realized that we could no longer sustain this beautiful building. Unfortunately, the building was just way too big for us. So the board came together and we talked about some options. We wanted to maintain our identity. So we thought perhaps we could go to a storefront. Now, for those of you that might not be familiar with Congregation Beth Shalom, we were located in Pompton Lakes, but we drew from many different areas. I happen to live in Lincoln Park, but it was Pompton Lakes, it was Wayne, because when we first started, there was no conservative synagogue in Wayne. They came from Pequannock, they came from Riverdale, as far as Kinnelon. So they were coming from many different communities. So when we thought about relocating, we felt that we had to try and stay in the area. So we were predominantly looking in Pompton Lakes. And after a while, after taking time and really looking at many different storefronts with all the issues that brought up, parking and expenses, we realized that a storefront might not be the answer for us, but that perhaps we had to realize that merger might be the answer for us. And so we decided to look around. We had a committee that decided to look into neighboring synagogue, conservative. And after we did, we came back with a couple of them to the board and to the congregation. At the time, our rabbi was 3/4 time. One Shabbat, he was off, and we had a lay person that would do services Friday and Saturday. So during that period of time, we did not have services on that fourth Shabbat. We encouraged our members to go to the different synagogues that we thought we might be interested in to see how they felt about the services at these different synagogues. And that became a problem. We didn't have a lot of shul goers anymore. And so some people went and others said they were going to go, but just never seemed to get around to it. But when people finally did go, it came down to 2 congregations, one in Wayne and one in Pine Brook. But we were only going to merge with one. We actually met with Federation, some of your people that knew better, and everybody suggested to us that we not do options, that we lead the congregation to one place, that would be the best thing. And so we took a vote, and we only were down to, I think, like 40 units. 11 went to, I'm sorry, let me get my numbers exactly. I think 14 went to the congregation in Wayne, and the rest of them, over 30, decided they wanted to go to Pine Brook. And so we were going to merge with Pine Brook, but we would make some kind of monetary arrangements with the synagogue in Wayne. Again, not a merger, but we would make some kind of financial arrangements that we sat down and discussed with them. Over about a year's period, we actually, it took us a while to sell the building. Selling the building wasn't that easy. And the other thing that I have to repeat that you've heard again, it was 2 things. It was not just leaving the building. Everybody felt quite an attachment, and it was bittersweet. And the other thing was we needed to find a place where we felt comfortable with the services and where a marriage was made, where people really invited us and where we felt comfortable. And I know some people say, well, why didn't you feel comfortable here? Or why didn't you feel comfortable there? There's such a thing called chemistry, and it does work in some places and not in others. For us, the merger with Pine Brook has worked very well. Our rabbi stayed with us for about a year because that was his contract, and he knew about a year in advance that that was going to be, unfortunately, the end for him, that we couldn't sustain him anymore. And he also knew that if he found something prior to us actually merging, that we would allow him out of the contract, that there was no problem. So that worked out very well. But we were able to work out details with the merger. We had a wish list, certain things that were very important to our legacy. And every congregation has some different issues. We brought over a menorah that was on the outside of our building that has a perfect spot right now in Pine Brook. And we had a brick garden. And now beneath this menorah sits a brick garden that we brought with us that will be there forever. They have a kitchen that is a dairy kitchen. We are redoing a CBS kitchen that's going to be a dairy meat kitchen. It was supposed to start last year, but due to COVID, it will hopefully begin this year. Our memorial plaques were just installed at Pine Brook, and that was a very big thing that was important to us. Somebody asked about our name. The name wasn't as important to us. I know, again, that is important to some congregations, but that wasn't the most important thing to us. We also have seats on the board so that our board members, we are part of their board so that we have a say in what's going on. And some of us are very active. And again, I think it's a marriage that was made in heaven. We are all very, very happy. I really don't think I need a whole lot more time, Josh. I'm good with
That's great.
sharing my information.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all 4 of you for sharing your experience. I'm going to open up for questions. I just want to address a couple things. One is someone had asked about creating a regular forum for collaboration with neighboring synagogues. We could definitely, as Federation and SLI, do that. I'll send out information about that kind of thing when we send a follow-up email. So I'm going to open up to questions. If you have a question that you feel that you prefer to ask anonymously, please feel free to send that to me and I could ask it. And if you have a question that you want off the record, just please say that before you start, and I'll remove that from the recording. So I think the best way to manage this is, without getting too chaotic, is if you could sort of just raise your hand or wave, and then I'll call on you, so we don't all start speaking at once. Steve Schwimmer.
Thanks, Josh. I was the one who sent that comment about the forum for collaboration. I just wanted to sort of elaborate on that a little bit. It just seems to me that a common theme, and I've been through a couple of synagogue mergers also. We merged with Temple B'nai Israel in Fair Lawn and Community Hebrew School of Patterson back in the 1990s. So I'm familiar with the process of merger, and I find that the common theme that we seem to experience is that we're all pretty much fending on our own. We're all off on our own devices, finding the marriage partners without a shotgun, helping to arrange marriages when it's appropriate to do that. And I just think that some sort of a centralized forum where all of us can meet on a semi-regular basis because we all have common concerns and common challenges, and figure out ways in which we can share expenses, share Hebrew school principles, share buildings, share other expenses, and ultimately lead to something more substantive. I think would really, really benefit the community.
Henry. Oh, you're muted. Still muted.
Yeah.
There.
Okay. What were the numbers of membership units of the two groups that merged to form your new synagogue?
Is that for Beverly or Joel?
No, for Joel.
Oh, so prior to merger, Temple Beth L was, well, we'll say 220, but it wasn't really 220. And Temple Beth Or was probably 250 families, something like that. So like all in, we probably had 450 on the rolls, which doesn't really mean 450. It probably means closer to 400. And we ended up with probably 3.25, something like that. And we knew there'd be some attrition. And as we did our budgeting and whatnot, we kind of built that into the model, knowing full well that either people would say, this just isn't for me, or I've been looking for an excuse to leave the temple and pay dues for a long time, or I'm just not quite sure how this is going to work out. So I'm just going to sit on the bench for a year and see if this thing actually gets off the ground. And if it does, maybe I'll come back. And we've seen probably a dozen families in that category, which has been a little, it's been very nice.
Okay, thank you.
Michael Goldberg.
Yeah, Joel, you just mentioned in terms of attrition, how much of a factor was COVID? Because if you wouldn't have merged, what kind of percentage of loss would you have had in the COVID environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say
Yeah.
because this all happened. The official merger happened in July of 2019. So,
So you
all
already
of
merged.
we were merged, well merged by the time COVID hit. We didn't have a building, and it was actually a perfect time not to have a building.
Right.
But
I have one other question with you. You said you brought in a consultant. So the question is, how long did that consultant stay? What was it through the whole process, or was it just to sell the idea to your congregation because of what the reform movement is going through? So was the consultant was it costly, and was it worth it?
So it was 100% worth it. I'm a huge fan of Rabbi Wolfman's because this concept of organizational change takes the business out of it. The business we had covered. We knew we couldn't make it, and a room full of board members can do the math. What he did was help us craft the story and the process to the rest of the congregation. You can't just spring this on somebody in a congregational meeting. It was a months and months long process. So he was with us for probably about a year. I mean, you're talking maybe 5, 6, 8 hours a month maximum. Mostly phone calls, a lot of calls with our clergy. And if I remember correctly, it was about 25 grand all in. So it wasn't cheap. But
Okay,
I wouldn't consider doing something like this without him, knowing now what I know.
Josh, I have a question. I don't know where I am in the queue.
You're next.
Okay, thanks.
Harvey, was that you?
Yes, it was.
Sorry,
Hi, thanks.
Josh.
Good evening, everybody. Joel, I happen to have grown up in Hallworth, so I was those 60 plus years. I'm 64 now, and it was opening as I was moving into Hallworth back then. So glad to see where you all have gotten. I'm only surprised that earlier in your conversation, you said you spoke with a bunch of different congregations. And one thing I'm thinking about is that there aren't that many of like in terms of reform to reform or conservative to conservative. So were you looking very far away? I mean, because I'm trying to think just visually, geographically, how many congregations would even have been relevant for you within X miles of Closter?
Yeah, I don't want to name names,
yeah.
but we probably, I don't think we had a geographical, target in mind. I mean, we knew it had to kind of be in the general catchment area of where our folks lived and where their folks lived. But, I would say probably 10-mile radius, 12-mile radius around. So, and we looked beyond just another Reformed congregation, because we were even considering, cohabitation, sharing a campus, building a campus, whatever.
Yeah, that makes more sense. And I assume that. Okay. But you did not go that route. And that was because the route of Reformed conservative looked too hard, or because you were fortunate just to have found a good partner on the Reform world?
A little of both. Reform conservative was a challenge, and some of the other folks brought this up. Some of the decisions, things like kosher kitchens and bringing snacks into Hebrew school. It sounds, some of them sound kind of small, but they're actually, they become very large very quickly. And we realized that other than just sharing a campus, it would be very difficult to merge a congregation or even cohabitate in the same building, Reform to conservative or vice versa.
Thank you.
Barry, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you, Josh. I wanted to ask Jay Murray a question. I was very intrigued by the discussion of the Hebrew school merger between JCCP and Paramus and the Fair Lawn Jewish Center. That Hebrew school, Jay, is currently functioned as a merged Hebrew school entity only in a COVID Zoom world to this point, or has that Hebrew school actually shared classrooms back and forth between both of your locations?
We've not had a chance yet to share classrooms. We've done joint activities with the kids outside, but we have not had classes yet. We took a survey of our parents from both locations back in November. We did a formal survey. We've done informal since then, asking if parents were comfortable sending their kids back. And some were, but it was a minority. We've made the decision that based on where the students are from, the towns that they are from, we would follow whichever town has the strictest COVID guidelines as far as whether we were willing to go back or not. So what we did was, if, for example, Fair Lawn was full remote, then the school was full remote. If Paramus was full remote, then the school was full remote. To date, between that and between the parent sentiment, we've just stayed remote. And from a Zoom perspective, it's really working out nicely. How will it be when we're in person? We've got the plan in place. We know what we're going to do. We know how many days it will be in which location, because it's going to be split. And it's already, the calendar for next year is already being worked on, with parents being involved in making those decisions. So I'm hoping that it goes as well next year when we're in person. It's gone really well over Zoom. So we're hoping. My personal feeling is I could easily see Sundays having full attendance, but Tuesdays, maybe a couple of extra kids might choose to not because they have a baseball practice or whatever, and they'll complain enough to their parents that the parents won't want to hear it. But it remains to be seen right now.
So I have just a follow-up question. So you've named this the Community Hebrew School of Bergen County. You mentioned that you're trying to attract students from other congregations. Has that been an irritant to other schools? Or those schools have Hebrew schools and you're potentially siphoning away students from them, or has that not become an issue?
It's not become an issue to date. And most of the conversations that we've had with others so far are shuls that currently either their Hebrew school has ceased to operate, and they're looking for something for their students, or it's synagogues that they see the benefit of having the larger class sizes and are willing to start the discussions regarding that. Our estimate, based on last year's enrollment, last year being pre-COVID, the merged entity would have had about 70 students this year. COVID took a huge chunk out of that. Most of the chunk came out of the younger grades because the parents just can't handle the Zoom burnout that the kids are suffering from. We've got a list of students who have reached out saying, when you have an in-person event, then we want to be there. We've just planned one for the pre-K and K kids in the beginning of March, outdoors, so that we can get those kids to re-engage with a Jewish education and realize that it can be fun. Because, at that age, if you don't keep them engaged, at least periodically, then they're just not going to come back until the parents are forced to for a bar and bat mitzvah.
I think it's going to be an interesting trend with synagogues, not just in our area, that they're going to be forced to regionalize their educational programs for lack of enough enrollment, and Hebrew schools cost a lot of money.
Right. Exactly.
And so I think it's a trend that's probably going to continue. Thank you, Jay. I appreciate the feedback.
You.
Do we have any other questions? And if someone doesn't have their video on, I can't see you raising your hand, so feel free to unmute yourself. If not,
I have a question.
Oh, yes, Michael.
For Joel. Interesting. Your presentation was great. I really got a lot out of it, but I just wondered, how did it evolve that you both decided to sell your buildings? Was it the overhead, or was it the, if you sell the building, then you eliminate a lot of the angst about, everybody's sacrificing or everybody's compromising to an equal extent. So can you elaborate on that decision of selling both buildings?
Yeah, it was, ironically, that was kind of like the no-brainer. I mean, it had to be sold to the congregation because there's a lot, my grandchild was born here, got married here. I got, all of the emotional attachment. But again, setting that aside, Temple Beth El, I'm told in its heyday had 600 families. And we were down to, low 200s at best, and it's still in the same facility. So we were just wildly underutilizing the facility. Somebody mentioned before that they were growing up when the temple was built 60 years ago. So it's a 60-year-old building with 60-year-old stuff in it, infrastructure.
Right.
I mean, it was just a dog with fleas financially. And Temple Beth Or was not so different. I think their building was slightly newer, but not by, maybe 10 years newer. So it was still, it was too big, it was too old, it was too costly to maintain. So we each had buildings that were roughly between 25 and 30,000 square feet each, total, including classrooms, worship space, everything. And the building that we bought and have refurbished is about 17,000 feet. So we've downsized considerably. It won't fully suit us. We're going to have to find a location for high holidays because our sanctuary in the new place can't hold, 800 or 900 people. But we agreed that was a reasonable trade-off.
Okay, thank you. Mazel tov.
Thank you.
So if no one else has any more questions, I'm going to close this up. Rachel shared a link in the chat, and I usually ask you to fill that out, but I'm going to ask you not to fill that out because we're going to modify it after some of the comments about having a continued conversation on this. So I'm going to modify the survey and I'll send it out in our follow-up email. So please keep an eye out for that, where we'll get a little bit of feedback on this and see what kind of commitment people are interested in as far as meeting in the future on collaboration. So thank you so much to Joel, Evan, Jay, and Beverly. There are a lot of feelings tied up in all this, and I didn't give them nearly enough time, to cover, these deep subjects, but they all did a great job of sharing, a lot of the highlights. So thank you. Thank you very much. And then thank you everyone else for joining us. Please check out the email for the survey that we'll be sending out tomorrow. And then, keep an eye out for other programming coming up in the future. Stay safe, and we hope to see you at a program later.
Be safe.
Bye.